Knowledge, Domain 9, Lesson 5. Here are this lesson's learning targets. Our goals are: I can review key details about Columbus. I can describe what happened after Columbus made other trips westward and will explain why we remember him on Columbus Day. I can demonstrate an understanding of the word ashamed. I can illustrate one of Columbus's journeys. Let's talk about what we have already learned in this domain. Columbus was very happy because he thought he had reached the Indies in Asia. When Columbus began exploring, he didn't find as much gold as he expected. Columbus did not find Asia or the Indies, but an entirely different continent and group of people. Remember, Columbus did not realize his mistake. In what year did Columbus make his voyage? 1492. The people Columbus met on his first visit to the island of Hispaniola in 1492 were not Indians from India, but were native people from the Taino tribe. The peaceful Taino lived in large huts around a central plaza where they had meetings and ceremonies and where children played group games. There were thousands of Taino people who had been living on the island of Hispaniola for a very long time before Columbus landed there. The term American Indian came about because Columbus mistook the Taino tribe for Indians from the Indies, where he thought he had landed. In today's story, you will hear the following new vocabulary words. Ashamed. Ashamed means feeling badly or guilty for something you have done. I felt ashamed after I was mean to my sister. Empire. An empire is the people and places ruled by a person or country. The British Empire was once the largest in the world. Historians. Historians are people who study the people and events of the past. Many historians work at museums. Now it's time for the read aloud. Listen carefully to find out what happened after Christopher Columbus and his crew reached land. The title of today's read aloud is Further Adventures of Christopher Columbus. When Christopher Columbus set sail from Europe for the second time, he commanded not 3, but 17 ships. He told himself, I will return to Hispaniola and find the men I left on that island waiting to help me. We will find the wealth of Asia and be rich. Everything seemed to be working perfectly. But the most important word in that statement is seemed. In fact, this time Columbus was sailing straight into trouble. Reaching Hispaniola, he found that the fort his men had assembled from the wooden planks of the Santa Maria was gone. There was no sign of the sailors he had left there either. Something was terribly wrong. Columbus spoke with a few of the native island people, whom he still insisted on calling Indians. He learned that while he was away, the Spanish crew had been unkind to the native people and had taken advantage of them. Columbus had originally come in peace, but his greediness and the greediness of his sailors had changed things on the island. The men who had sailed with Columbus on his second voyage also treated the natives badly and were just as greedy for treasure. Once more, Columbus and his crew took advantage of the natives. They were forced to work for no pay, carving mines into the high mountain sides. "There is gold in those mountains," Columbus and his men told one another, "and we did not sail all this way to leave it there." But they did not find as much gold as they had expected. When Columbus returned to Spain from his second voyage, the king and queen did not like the report he gave them. Isabella said, "We will let you sail a third time for us, but you had better find spices and more gold this time." On his third voyage, Columbus thought, "Surely this time I will find a city rich with gold and spices, like those I have heard about." But all he saw were jungles. During his search, Columbus became very sick. Weak and discouraged, he ordered his men to head for Hispaniola. When they got there, Columbus was surprised to find that a nobleman sent by Ferdinand and Isabella was waiting for him. The reason the king and queen had sent the nobleman is because they heard that after the second voyage that Columbus was treating the native people cruelly and was keeping the gold for himself. The nobleman had been ordered to spy on Columbus and to arrest him if this turned out to be true. Indeed, the nobleman heard from many people on the island how Columbus and his men had mistreated the native people of Hispaniola. The nobleman announced, "Christopher Columbus, you are being charged with keeping all the gold and treasure for yourself, and therefore are doing a terrible job as governor. The king and queen will decide your fate." Columbus sailed the long journey home to Spain, not as the ship's commander, as he had once been, but as a prisoner headed to jail. He wondered how he would be greeted by King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella. At first, when Columbus arrived in Spain, he was thrown in jail. Later, when he appeared before the king and queen, they were shocked by the difference in the man they now saw before him. His hair had turned completely white, his body had grown bent and weak, and the man who had boldly stepped forward in the past now limped into their presence. King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella were ashamed. They took pity on Columbus and ordered that he be released from jail. They set Columbus free and ordered that his share of the wealth be returned to him. Their Majesties shattered Columbus's dreams of returning to his former importance by announcing, "You are free, but you will no longer be the governor of our new empire." They put someone new in charge of Hispaniola and the lands beyond. The king and queen told Columbus, "We will give you one last chance to find the wealth of Asia." They gave him a few old ships that hardly seemed strong enough to make it out of the harbor and into the open sea. So Columbus took those rotting Spanish ships safely across the Atlantic. Sailing up and down the lush green coast, he searched once more for the Asian cities he still believed must be there. Of course they were not, and not finding them, he did not go ashore to explore. Discouraged, Columbus returned to Spain once again without the gold and spices he desired. Christopher Columbus never set sail again. He died still believing that he had found the Indies, but other explorers disagreed. They realized that instead of Asia, Columbus had actually found a place that Europeans had never known about between Asia and Europe. Because they had never before known about this place, it was new to them. They called it the New World. Today, every year in October, Americans remember Christopher Columbus's arrival in the Americas back in 1492. This day is called Columbus Day. Later, you will learn about a group of people called the Vikings who set sail to North America even before Columbus did. Historians from many countries have researched and retold the story of Christopher Columbus many times over. It means different things to different people, but one thing we know for sure is that Columbus's mistake changed the world. Now I will ask you a question about today's story. What happened in October of 1492? Columbus sighted land on his first voyage and came upon the Americas, even though he didn't know that's what it was. Now we'll ask you some more questions about today's story. Why did King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella want to put Christopher Columbus in jail? King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella wanted to put Christopher Columbus in jail because he did not bring enough gold back to Spain for them and because he and his crew mistreated the native people. How did Columbus and his crew mistreat the native people? While Columbus was back in Spain after his first voyage, the men who stayed on the island of Hispaniola treated the natives badly and made them work very hard. The men continued to mistreat the natives even when Columbus returned as governor. They made the natives work as enslaved people, not paying them in exchange for their work. They made them dig mines in search of gold. What happened to Columbus when he returned to Spain after his second voyage without the riches he had promised Ferdinand and Isabella? The king and queen thought he was keeping gold for himself and sent a nobleman to Hispaniola to spy on Columbus. Later, the king and queen had Columbus arrested and thrown in jail for not bringing enough gold and for the mistreatment of the natives. Did King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella free Columbus? Why? Yes, they freed Columbus because they felt ashamed of how they treated him when he had helped them grow their empire. Spain now ruled over all the lands that Columbus and his men took over. Today we know a lot about Columbus because of historians, people who study the past. Our country remembers Columbus on Columbus Day, October 12th. Why do you think we remember Columbus on that particular day? We remember Columbus on October 12th because that is the day in 1492 that Columbus sighted land on his first voyage and came upon the Americas, even though he didn't know that's what it was. Do you think the New World was really new? Why or why not? The New World wasn't really new because Native Americans had been living in the Americas for thousands of years. The people from Europe did not know that North America and South America existed, so to them it was a new world. Now it's time for some word work. In the read aloud, you heard King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella were ashamed of how they treated Columbus. Say the word ashamed with me. Ashamed. Ashamed means feeling bad or guilty for something you have done, or because of how you have been treated. You might feel ashamed if you grab a toy from a baby and the baby starts to cry. Are there things Columbus and his crew did for which they should have felt ashamed? What were they? Use the word ashamed when you tell about it. You can begin your sentence by saying, Columbus and his crew should have felt ashamed when. What's the word we've been talking about? That's right, ashamed. Now I am going to read some phrases. If the phrase I read to you is an example of when someone should feel ashamed, say ashamed. If the phrase I read to you is an example of when someone should not feel ashamed, say not ashamed. A boy takes a piece of gum from his mother's purse without asking. He should feel ashamed. Girls and boys who tease other children. They should feel ashamed. A girl who wins her baseball game. She should not feel ashamed. A woman who honks her horn impatiently at people crossing the street. She should feel ashamed. A man who writes a great story. He should not feel ashamed. Now it's time to show what you've learned. Remember that Columbus made 4 voyages to the Americas, which he incorrectly thought was the Indies. What are some things you learned about Columbus's voyages? Choose one of Columbus's voyages to draw. Draw a scene or event that happened during one of Columbus's voyages. After drawing your picture, you can label it with the voyage number. Now, let's review this lesson's learning targets. Our goals are: I can review key details about Columbus. I can describe what happened after Columbus made other trips westward and will explain why we remember him on Columbus Day. I can demonstrate an understanding of the word ashamed. I can illustrate one of Columbus's journeys. That completes our knowledge lesson. Happy learning!